Ki. ISKCON founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki. New Govardhana Ki. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to Shri Guru and Shri Paranga. Hey, Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 2, Text 26. Tato Nanda Vrajamitaha Pitra Kamsad Vibhayataha Ekadasamas Tatra Gurache Sabolovasat Tato Nanda Vrajamitaha Pitra Kamsad Vibhayataha Ekadasamas Tatra Gurache Sabolovasat. Word for word. Tataha, thereafter. Nanda Brajam, cow pastures of Nanda Maharaj. Itaha, being brought up. Pitra, by his father. Kamsat, from Kamsa. Vibhayata, being afraid of. Ekadash, 11. Samaha, years. Tatra, therein. Guda achehe, covered fire. Sabalaha, with Baladev. Avasat, recited. Translation. Thereafter, his father, being afraid of Kamsa, brought him to the cow pastures of Nanda, Maharaj Nanda, and there he lived for 11 years, like a covered flame with his elder brother, Baladev. Purport by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. There was no necessity of the Lord being dispatched to the house of Nanda Maharaj out of fear of Kamsa's determination to kill him as soon as he appeared. It is in the business of the Asura to try to kill the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or to prove by all means that there is no God, or that Krishna is an ordinary human being or not God. Lord Krishna is not affected by such determination of men of Kamsa's class, but in order to play the role of a child, he agreed to be carried away by his father to the cow pastures of Nanda Maharaj, because Vasudeva was afraid of Kamsa. Nanda Maharaj was due to receive him as a child, and Yashoda Mai was also to enjoy the childhood pastimes of the Lord. And therefore, to fulfill everyone else's desire, he was carried from Mathura to Vrindavan just after his appearance in the prison house of Kamsa. He lived there for 11 years and completed all his fascinating pastimes of childhood, boyhood and adolescence with his older brother Lord Baladev. His first expansion, Vasudeva thought of protecting Krishna from the wrath of Kamsa is part of the transcendental relationship. The Lord enjoys more when someone takes him as a subordinate son who needs the protection of a father than he does when someone accepts him as a supreme Lord. He is the father of everyone, and he protects everyone. But when his devotees takes it for granted that the Lord is to be protected by the devotees' care, it is transcendental joy for the Lord, Thus, when Vasudev, out of fear of Kamsa, carried him to Vrindavan, the Lord enjoyed it. Otherwise, he had no fear from Kamsa or anyone else. So I'd like to ask for the blessings of the senior devotees that I may say something of value today. And I offer my obeisances to Srila Prabhupada and the previous acharyas before him, and of course my spiritual master. I'm just here when you see Nanda Maharaj having that fatherly love for Krishna. It reminds me of something that I'm reading at the moment. I'm sure that you have read it, but I'm reading Yamuna Devi Dasa's book at the moment. If you haven't read it, it's really amazing. Everyone needs to read this book. But just this fatherly love, this is when she first went to Vrindavan, so they're just these new devotees over in Braj, and they're experiencing all these people which have known Krishna their whole lives, have grown up knowing Krishna. And all the Americans and Europeans are very new to Krishna consciousness. And they met this man who's been in Vrindavan his whole life. And they went to his house, and they seen that his deities, first of all, were wearing black. And the devotees were like, how come the deities are wearing like this real dark black and nothing else? It's just like black. And he was like, oh, my deities are so effulgent, I wouldn't be able to look at them if I dressed them nicely, so I put them in black. And they also noticed that he never offered his obeisances to his deities. And he said, I don't offer my obeisances to my deities because these deities are like my children. Krishna's like my child, so I don't offer him obeisances. So that kind of relates to this verse just here. We shouldn't follow in the footsteps of that. That would be quite offensive for us. Maybe okay for some of you, but for myself especially. So this chapter, which we've been talking about this month, entitled The Remembrance of Lord Krishna, is such an important title for our Krishna consciousness life. The title right there is The Perfection of Life, to remember Krishna. And what are the two important things in Krishna consciousness? To always remember Krishna and never forget him. So in Canto 6 of the Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 16, 53-54, it says, in the human form of life, one should understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, for then one will understand everything else. Yasmin vijnate savam ivam vijnatam bhavate. Mundaka Upanishad 1.3. According to this Vedic injunction, simply by understanding Krishna, one understands Brahman, Paramatma, Prakriti, the illusionary energy, the spiritual energy, and everything else. Everything will be revealed. Prakriti, the material nature, is working under the direction of the Lord, and we living entities are being carried away by various phases of it. And for self-realization, one should always remember Krishna, as stated in the Padma Purana. Smatavya satatam Vishnuho. We should always remember Lord Vishnu. Vishmatavyo na datu chit. We should never forget the Lord. And this is the perfection of life. O descendant of King Bharat, one who desires to be free from all miseries must hear about, glorify, and also remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the super soul, the controller, and the saviour of all miseries. So we see throughout the Bhagavatam how important it is to always have our mind fixed upon Krishna and always remembering Krishna. And sometimes when we read this, it can sound quite simple. Think of Krishna, always remember Krishna. But for myself especially, it can be quite difficult at times. The mind's very turbulent, restless, and to subdue it is very difficult. More difficult than controlling the wind, as stated in the Bhagavad Gita 6.34. And lately I've been listening to Swayam Bhagavan Keshava Maharaj, who is just a new sannyasi within ISKCON. He's an amazing devotee. And I try to listen to one of his classes once a day. he gives fantastic classes. And he was talking about the mind and how distracting it can be when we're trying to place our thoughts upon Krishna, remembering Krishna and so forth. And he was saying that the mind is like, our computer, and having all these tabs up on our computer or out on our phone. I know Labunga, sometimes when we've got my computer out on my phone, she looks through and there's like 100 tabs up. And she's like, what are you doing? So this is like the mind. We've got so many things going on in the mind, so many plans, thinking so many things, thinking about the past, thinking about what we should say to this person. And it just absolutely clouds the mind. It makes it very difficult to think of Krishna and to remember Krishna. Then Keshava Maharaj, he went on to tell a story how the mind really is and the difficulties that we experience when placing our mind upon Krishna, remembering Krishna, the Supreme Lord. He goes on to tell a story about a monkey and how it relates to our mind. And when we go to India, if anyone's ever been to India, especially Vrindavan, you see the monkeys there. They're very fickle. They're here, there, and everywhere. At the moment, they're after people's cell phones. That's a big thing this year, so they're getting cell phones. So carry your cell phone nicely. So the mind's like a monkey, very fickle. But not only like this fickle monkey, the mind is like a fickle monkey who is intoxicated on alcohol. Imagine that, a monkey intoxicated on alcohol. And just when you think it couldn't get any worse, a fickle monkey intoxicated on alcohol who has just been stung by a scorpion. So this is quite bad now. Fickle monkey, intoxicated, just been stung by a scorpion. Then it goes on to say, fickle monkey, intoxicated, stung by a scorpion, who is haunted by a ghost. This is what the minds are like within the material world. So his fickleness has reached a point beyond imagination. So this is our mind. So many hurdles and obstacles. So we have to find ways to overcome this fickle mind, which can be very difficult at times. And about 3 weeks ago, I was reading a book by a man called Ed Millett, and it's called The Power of One More. And I find that it can go along with Krishna consciousness very nicely, some of his techniques. Because sometimes in life we can become lazy-minded. So it's good to keep the mind active and go above that. So this book called The Power of One More, it teaches that when we always set out to do something, if we just do one more, we overcome the difficulties of the mind. So for a devotee, if we were to set out and chant 16 rounds a day, that day we'll chant 17 rounds. We're overcoming the mind. If you're going to read Prabhupada's books for 1 hour a day, you read Prabhupada's books for 1 hour and 10 minutes a day. If you're going to associate with the devotees for 1 hour a day, associate with devotees for 1 hour and 20 minutes each day. If you're going to tell your partner you love them 3 times a day, you tell them you love them 4 times a day. So you're always doing that extra little bit. And I find that's very good for the mind because, especially in spiritual life, if we get lazy and complacent and we're not going that little bit extra, we can tend to drift backwards or you can't really stay still, you'll tend to stay backwards. So I find that very beneficial, and I've been doing that in my spiritual life ever since I read this book. I kind of observed my own spiritual life and what I can improve and areas that I can work on. So always doing that little bit more, and I found that's very good for the mind, our monkey mind, which is always looking for shortcuts and excuses. So someone who is very good at overcoming all these obstacles, not only within our mind, but in the world around us, is no other than His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. And recently, as I said, reading Yamuna Devadasi's book, you really get to see and picture how amazing Srila Prabhupada was. He had so many things to overcome. When he first came to America, there's a story within that book when he first came to America and how difficult it was for him and how much he had to rise above. It talks how he was storing his food in the freezer at one of the houses he went to in America, and they had cat food in there and meat in there, and that was very difficult for Srila Prabhupada. But he was always rising above, he was always doing that little bit extra. And sometimes we forget how much he left behind, Srila Prabhupada. Leaving behind the holy land of Vrindavan Dham, leaving behind the amazing holy association that he had, and the comforts that he had in Vrindavan. I'm sure all devotees always use him as an example of rising above not only our own minds but the world around us and put Krishna first, as Prabhupada always did, by great example. And to explain explain a little bit more about Prabhupada, being the great example that he was, I was listening to Shivaram Swami the other day. And Shivaram Swami was talking about a story back in the early 90s at the Manor over in the UK. And there were some issues at the Manor in the early 90s he was talking about, and they were almost going to lose the temple. And they had to bring in some big lawyers, the big wigs. These guys, he was explaining they had the wigs and those grey wigs. And they were very intelligent men, and they came to meet him at the temple. And they said, look, if we going to work for you, we need to understand your philosophy. We need to understand what's going on here. So he handed them a few books, and in a couple of days they'd read the books. He goes on to, they must have had photographic memories, they read them very fast. And after reading the books, they came back to see Maharaj, and they said, look, these books are amazing. Really amazing. And they turned around the book and they started to point at Srila Prabhupada, and they said that this gentleman right here, he's out of this world ridiculous. He's totally amazing. And Shivaram Swami was like, yeah, I know. This is Srila Prabhupada. He's my spiritual master. I'm giving my life to Srila Prabhupada ever since I met him. Every day I'm working for Srila Prabhupada's movement. I know how amazing Srila Prabhupada is. No. Sorry, you don't understand how amazing this gentleman right here is. Yeah, I do. He's my spiritual master. I'm giving my life to Srila Prabhupada. I love Srila Prabhupada with all my heart. Of course I know how amazing he is. No, you don't understand, young boy. And at the time, Shivaram Swami was only 40 years old. He's like, you don't understand. He said, I'm 70 years old. You're 40 years old. You don't understand what it's like to be a 70-year-old man in a 70-year-old body. I work with people who do amazing work, big hours at this age, and it's very, very difficult. But to hear the story about this gentleman right here on the back of this book, this Srila Prabhupada, is one of the most amazing, if not the amazing story I've ever heard in my life. To be 70 years old, to have these bodily problems, to be dealing with the world around you, and travel around the world multiple times and spread this movement all around the world is completely mind-blowing. And when we hear this story about Srila Prabhupada, for myself, I'm still quite young, so it's hard for me to understand. But the things that Srila Prabhupada had to overcome, to leave the holy Dham, his association, to have all these problems within America when he first arrived. But to still fix his mind, which we're talking about today, to still fix his mind on Krishna always remembering Krishna and always remembering his spiritual master and always pushing forward. And we see by his example, if we do that in our life, to always remember Krishna, to always put Krishna first, to always put the spiritual master first, we can accomplish great things. And not only can we accomplish great things, but we can do that with a peaceful mind, which is so rare in today's world. So always doing that little bit more for Krishna. What is it? We take one step towards Krishna and Krishna takes 10 towards us, or 100? 100. So Krishna takes that. And that takes me back to what I was reading the other week. When we really observe our own spiritual life and see, can I put in more? Can I do more for Krishna? And if we can, if we've got it inside us to do that little bit more for Krishna, Krishna's going to walk more towards us. So this is Srila Prabhupada, always leading by example, overcoming so much. So yeah, we have to overcome our monkey minds. There's so many obstacles and hurdles stopping us from reigniting our relationship with Krishna. To always think and remember of Krishna. So many other obstacles blocking us from doing this in our own lives. And one of the biggest ones for us is, I don't have enough time. I want to do a little bit more for Krishna, but I don't have enough time. I want to read more of Prabhupada's books, but I don't have enough time. I want to chant more rounds, but I don't have enough time. And recently I was listening to a lecture of His Holiness Tamal Krishna Goswami, and he was saying that this Krishna consciousness is of most importance. It's the only asset in our lives which is permanent. Everything within this material world is coming and going. All these assets that we're gaining one day are going to fall to our wayside. But he goes on to say this Krishna consciousness is the only asset of any value which is permanent. So we should see how far we can take this. We should see how deep we can take our own Krishna consciousness. So we have to make time, as this is the only real asset we have in this life. It goes on to say an example of this is not having time to do such an important thing like progress and work hard our own Krishna consciousness is like driving a car. Say we all decide to go on a road trip together. We're going to go to Cairns. We want to start a new temple there again. We hop in the car and I start driving and everyone's in the back. We're driving the Sankirtan van and I run out of petrol on the side of the freeway. And they're like, Padma, well, what's going on? You didn't fill up the car? I'm like, I don't have time. But some things we need to make time for. It's like eating. We make time for eating. If we don't eat, we just fade away and we die. But Krishna consciousness is of most value. So we should always be doing that extra within our own Krishna consciousness lives. We see Arjuna even took time out on the battlefield of Kurukshetra to hear the Bhagavad Gita. No one's ever too busy for Krishna consciousness. Another thing what can inhibit us on the path of our Krishna consciousness, or delay us from always remembering Krishna and never forgetting him, is thinking that we know too much. And we see this sometimes with people who, they might come from a Hindu background or something like this, and you're out on the streets and you're like, here's a Bhagavad Gita. Oh no, I've read the Bhagavad Gita, I don't need any of this, any of that. No, I know it all, I don't need anything. What do you think about chapter 19 in the Bhagavad Gita? Oh, it's great. Have you heard of Bhagavad Gita Canto 2? Oh yeah, I've read that. So, to deepen our own Krishna consciousness and to put ourselves in the best possible position to always remember Krishna and never forget him, we should always be open to learning more. in that humble state of mind. We're so fortunate here at New Govardhana that we've got so many senior devotees around who we can hear from. And this hearing can play a huge part in our own Krishna consciousness. So always willing to learn more and open to learn more. And by doing this, we're letting Krishna more and more within our hearts. Another thing we hear within Krishna consciousness is, after a while, we might say things like, "This isn't for me." This Krishna consciousness isn't for me. So this Krishna consciousness is for everybody. This is our true nature. Krishna consciousness lies dormant within every individual's heart. And just through a few fans, we can reignite that Krishna consciousness within our own hearts and other people's hearts. Going on now to a story by Jayapataka Swami Maharaj. I was listening to one of his lectures the other day. It was from a few years ago. He's a really inspiring devotee. He goes on to say, I'm going to read this word for word, I wrote it down as I was listening. "We are in a battle. Some say it is my nature to be fallen, my nature to be defeated. I can't do anything. But I know that by Krishna's mercy, my Guru's mercy, if I just stick it out, if I just try, somehow or another, just try to chant. If I somehow or another try to be Krishna consciousness, if I just try to keep up the effort, if I stumble and trip, I just get up and just keep on trying, then somehow or another I can hope to get their mercy in the future. That is glorious. Krishna becomes attracted to such determination. We are not in it for winning or losing materially. We just go on trying to be Krishna consciousness. If you try your whole life, you are guaranteed success just by trying. Jai Pataka Swami. Ki Jai. Amazing devotee. So, just to sum up what we spoke about today, the main point being to always remember Krishna and never forget him. We should always be in that mindset, because sometimes in the material world it's easy to get caught up in all the glitz and glamour around us. Everything's so shiny and bright within the material world. But we should always question ourselves in the morning. Am I remembering Krishna? Am I forgetting Krishna? What can I do to improve my relationship with Krishna? Because as Tamal Krishna Goswami went on to say, as I spoke about, is that it's our only asset which is really permanent. So every day we should question ourselves. Can we chant more? Yes, we can. Can we read more? Yes, we can. Can we get more association? Yes, we can. And by doing this, by always improving and always going up a step in our own Krishna consciousness, we're overcoming this fickle mind, just like that monkey we were talking about. Because if you give your mind a little inch, if you get lazy within our own practice, within our own lives, then the mind can just run away like a wild horse. But if we're always just pushing that little bit more. And I learned that you can go beyond the mind quite some measurements. From my sporting background, whether it was long distance running, rugby league, bodybuilding, there always came to a stage where the mind's like, I can't do any more. I'm going to quit now, or I'm tired, or I don't feel like getting up. But if you just each day just try to add a little bit more to the whole process of your life, it just grows and expands. And even if it's 1 minute a day extra reading, or a few rounds extra each day, after many, many years, that's much more time always remembering Krishna. And after years and years of all these minutes, hours piling up, all of a sudden, you're always remembering Krishna and you're never forgetting Krishna. And that, at the end of the day, as Srila Prabhupada would say, is the perfection of life. So I'll stop there if anyone's got any questions or comments, corrections.
Thank you very much. It was such a lovely class, really
Very
inspiring.
kind.
I'm going to read that bit extra every day, and those extra 3 rounds will be very, very nice class. I just wanted to mention, I believe the books that those lawyers were given was Lilamrita.
Okay, yeah.
So they read Lilamrita, and then they could understand, Prabhupada's amazing achievement. And myself now being 70, I can really understand, it's not that my appreciation for Prabhupada has, when I say grown, any different than how I always had the appreciation for Srila Prabhupada, but when you're, at this age, you think, how did Prabhupada do what he did? It's just so, and his health suffered at times as well. It wasn't like a complete good health. He actually, ended up with some health issues. But Prabhupada, his fire for preaching was so strong, and there was one time where he actually had a very high fever. This was in my report. He was very ill, and he actually was so ill he couldn't get out of bed. And some big government official had come to see Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was very conscious about building a good relationship with the government because of visas for his devotees. If you were a Commonwealth citizen in those early days, you didn't have to have a visa. So when I was in my report, you didn't have to have a visa. But for Americans, and I think I was the only Australian in India at that time who was a devotee, maybe 1 or 2, and in Bombay, but mostly all American devotees trying to stay on. But anyway, so Prabhupada was very ill, and then this high government official came, and Prabhupada's servant said to him, look, Sri Prabhupada's not well, he can't see you. And then he went to Prabhupada and said, such and such from so-and-so's here. And Prabhupada immediately got up, went down to the temple and started talking to him and preaching to him. And it was like, it's described that Prabhupada was just like on fire. You would have no idea that Prabhupada was ill. And he spoke, a couple of hours to this man, and then the man left, and Prabhupada immediately went upstairs and went back into his bed. He was so ill, but still he transcended that, uncomfortable condition. We can see that at Prabhupada's last days. He was translating, and sure, Prabhupada's, he was suffering. His body was so thin, he had eaten for months, and all the nerves in his body, they had no layer of fat, so even a sheet on his body caused great pain. And what was Prabhupada doing? He was translating. And, when I think of that, and I haven't read for the day, I think at least you can read Prabhupada's books for at least a few verses because of what he did for us. Reading his books, studying his books was so important to him for our benefit. So we have to really do that. And the other thing I wanted to mention about the monkey. I don't know if it's in this book, but she describes that in those early days in Vrindavan, monkeys, of course, are still there, and they're even worse now. They're still in smartphones. But there's this one particular monkey that she would go up on the roof and she would feed every day at a particular time. And then Prabhupada arrived and he was staying in that area. And all of a sudden, Yamuna realised she'd forgotten to warn Prabhupada about the monkey. She'd forgotten to take up some prashadam for the monkey. So she went running up the stairs because the monkeys can get quite aggressive.
Yeah.
Worrying, does the monkey attack Prabhupada or what happened? And she went up and there's Prabhupada talking in monkey talk to the monkey. And then the monkey went away and Yamuna said to Prabhupada, what were you doing? What were you saying? And Prabhupada said, I told the monkey to not come back again and stop bothering my disciples. And the monkey never came back again.
Yeah, thanks for those comments.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Thank you for the class. In respect to controlling the mind and always kind of pushing it a little bit more, I find it's a bit of a dichotomy because sometimes when I do push the mind and give it a little bit more austerity, I can easily forget why I'm doing that austerity and then I lose the benefit of it and it just becomes like just something that I'm doing. Do you have any advice on how to remember the intention of that?
Yeah, like I mentioned in the class, we should always, for example, Steve Jobs wake up in the morning and be like, if this was the last day of my life, would I still be doing what I'm about to do today? So he was like an entrepreneur, a businessman, but he always questioned why he was doing what he was doing. And I think sometimes in spiritual life we can get complacent and we stop questioning why we're doing things. And like I said, this Krishna consciousness is the topmost importance, as Tamal Krishna Goswami was saying in that lecture, which I repeated. So each morning we should wake up and we should question ourselves, why am I doing what I'm doing? And I find if we know why we're doing certain things, that doesn't show up. It's like recently I was speaking to Labanga and I said I was singing Mangalati and I was like the second last verse and I couldn't relate to English to the words, I forgot. So like the next week after that I went back and I was reading the English and going over it again because I knew I was starting to slack a little bit in that area. So we always have to wake up, question why we're doing certain things, be on the ball, as to speak. And if we are going to read for that extra 10 minutes or chant for an extra 10 minutes, we should know why we're going to be doing that. Yeah, because we're just doing things automatically. Like my spiritual master, B. Krishna Maharaj, he's always like, you're not being a stormtrooper, are you? From style, because they all dress the same, they all walk the same, they all do the same thing. So, yeah, I think that's good each morning when you wake up, why am I doing what I'm doing today? And before we do certain activities within our own Krishna consciousness. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Srila Prabhupada ki.